We all know that feeling, right? That sort of weight, that quietness, that feeling where you just wish it would ease up a bit.
Yeah, sadness.
It's something every single one of us runs into, but, there's this kind of subtle pressure in society, isn't there, to always be smiling?
Oh, absolutely. It makes it hard to actually figure out how to deal with sadness in a healthy way.
Because we live in a world that often puts happiness, like, way up on a pedestal.
Totally. And that can unintentionally make us feel like sadness is some kind of personal failing, something you just need to push down fast.
But when you really dig into it,
Well, sadness is so much more than just a negative feeling.
which is exactly what we're diving into today. This isn't about, like, getting stuck in sadness. It's about understanding it.
Right.
We want to explore why it's actually a fundamental part of our whole emotional experience and, maybe surprisingly, serves some really important roles.
Precisely. We've been looking at this really insightful article from Sensei. It's called Decoding Sadness, Its Purpose and Healthy Expression. And it draws from psychology and even evolutionary perspectives to really unpack what sadness is all about.
Unpacking feels like the perfect word for what we're trying to do here. The article seems aimed at helping us move beyond just feeling sad to really grasping it and finding constructive ways to, well, express it, all for better emotional well-being, basically.
Yeah, and what's great is its core mission. It's really trying to decode sadness, figure out why it's significant in our lives,
Right.
and give us some, clear insights into how we can express it healthily.
So if you've ever felt kind of overwhelmed by sadness or just wished you could understand it a bit better, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah.
We're going to try and give you a shortcut to that understanding, maybe reveal some unexpected facts, some practical strategies, so you can feel more informed and perhaps a little more accepting of this often misunderstood emotion.
Moving beyond just disliking it.
Exactly, to understanding and maybe even appreciating some of its, like, hidden benefits. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's start by looking at how multifaceted sadness really is.
Yeah.
It's not just one single thing we feel, is it?
No, not at all. It seems to have psychological, emotional, and even like physical dimensions. They're all connected.
Right. So from a psychological viewpoint, the article describes sadness as basically an emotional state of unhappiness.
Triggered by loss, yeah.
Yeah.
Losing something we value.
Exactly. And that could be something relatively small,
Right.
like disappointment or something really significant, grief, hopelessness.
And it's interesting, even though we label it negative,
Uh-huh.
the article says it plays a crucial role in how we adapt to things that happen in life.
Totally. And emotionally, the experience itself is so personal. People talk about it in such powerful ways, don't they?
Yeah, like a heavy heart or a silent tear or just a profound sense of loss.
It's this complex mix of feelings, thoughts, and physical sensations.
Mhm.
The APA, the American Psychological Association, reminds us that emotions are these intricate responses shaped by our own unique stuff. Memories, beliefs.
Which explains why my sadness might feel different from yours, right?
Precisely. And it's not just in our heads either. There are very real physiological things happening when we're sad.
Like the face, that classic sad face everyone recognizes.
Yeah, exactly. The inner eyebrows might pull up, and together the corners of the lips turn down, maybe the chin pushes up a bit.
And the article points out those expressions are pretty universal across cultures.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond the face, too. Our whole body language can shift.
Slumping, moving slower.
Right. We might find ourselves slumping, or our movements might become slower. And interestingly, inside our bodies, stuff is happening, too.
Like heart rate.
Heart rate, yeah, and something called skin conductance. Basically, how sweaty your palms get, which reflects emotional state. These can either increase or decrease.
Oh, so it's not always the same response.
Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
It suggests sadness isn't this single uniform state physiologically. It seems to have maybe different types or intensities depending on the trigger.
Okay, so like losing someone versus failing at something.
Exactly. Sadness from losing a loved one might have more sustained physical markers than, say, sadness from not hitting a goal, which might fade quicker.
That makes a lot of sense. And the brain's involved too, obviously.
Oh, yeah. The article mentions increased activity in areas like left amygdala, that's kind of our emotional control center,
Yeah.
and the right temporal pole. Plus, the hippocampus, which is big for memory, helps sort of contextualize why we might be feeling sad based on past stuff.
In chemicals, neurotransmitters.
Definitely. Neurochemical changes, too. Serotonin levels, often linked to mood, might dip. Cortisol, the stress hormone, often goes up.
Stress hormone goes up. Okay.
But interestingly, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, might also get released.
Really? Why is that?
Well, it could potentially prime us to seek comfort and connection with others when we're feeling down. It sort of highlights that biological drive to connect when we're hurting.
That's very different from, say, fear with its fight or flight.
Totally different. Sadness often brings lower energy, decreased activity in some brain areas, leading to that feeling of being, drained or lethargic.
And you mentioned different types of sadness earlier.
Yeah, the article talks about this idea like loss-evoked sadness, maybe with more tears, that feeling of a chest ache, powerlessness.
Okay.
Versus failure-evoked sadness, where maybe those features diminish quicker.
Huh.
And then there's even a distinction between activating sadness, which might involve more sympathetic nervous system arousal, and deactivating sadness, leading to more withdrawal.
Which could explain why past research on the physical side seemed a bit inconsistent sometimes.
Exactly. By looking at these different aspects and potential subtypes, we get a much richer, more nuanced picture of what sadness is and how it hits us on all these different levels.
Okay, so we've got a better handle on what sadness is and its different dimensions. But what usually sets it off? What are the common triggers?
Well, like we touched on, loss in the broadest sense seems to be a really major one.
And not just losing a person, right?
No, absolutely not. It could be losing a relationship, a job, financial security, even just, when our expectations aren't met. The article really emphasizes that this perceived or actual loss of something valued is often right at the core.
Makes sense. And it's not just the huge life-changing losses either.
Right. The article also mentions disappointment and failure as common triggers. Not reaching a goal, hitting a setback. Those can definitely bring on sadness.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you have the more significant, distressing life events, things like illness, abuse, trauma, unemployment, bereavement. These can all be really powerful triggers.
And social factors, too.
Big time. Loneliness, rejection, feeling like you don't have enough support, even just conflicts with people, all that can stir up sadness.
And the article also brings in biological and psychological stuff.
It does. Things like hormonal shifts, changes in brain chemistry, maybe persistent negative thinking patterns, or low self-esteem can all make us more vulnerable to feeling sad.
So the triggers are varied, and how it shows up must be too.
It's just as varied. The article breaks it down across emotions, behavior, physical sensations, and thoughts.
Emotionally, okay, that's the obvious stuff. Unhappiness, sorrow, grief, hopelessness.
Right, but also maybe a lack of interest in things, just a generally dampened mood, tearfulness, feelings of emptiness or loneliness.
Yeah.
And the article makes a really important point. Kids and teenagers might actually show more irritability than obvious sadness.
Oh, that's a key thing for parents or teachers to know.
Definitely. Behaviorally, you might notice someone crying more, getting unusually quiet, withdrawing socially, or just seeming really tired, lacking energy.
Slowed down movement or speech, too.
Yeah, even that. Losing interest in hobbies they usually love, preferring to stay home, stuff like that.
And physically, sadness can really take a toll, can't it?
It really can. Fatigue, sleep problems, either insomnia or sleeping way too much.
Appetite changes.
Appetite changes leading to weight gain or loss, yeah. And even unexplained physical aches, back pain, headaches, stomach issues. It really shows that strong mind-body connection.
Sometimes physical symptoms might be the main signal of emotional distress.
Exactly, or vice versa. And cognitively, thinking-wise.
Trouble concentrating, making decisions, memory issues.
All of those. Plus, negative thought patterns, feelings of worthlessness, maybe excessive guilt, can really cloud your thinking when you're sad.
Now, this feels like a really critical point the article makes, telling the difference between normal, everyday sadness and clinical depression.
Super important distinction. Because while they might share some feelings, they're definitely not the same thing.
Sadness is usually temporary, a response to life.
Right, it typically resolves. Whereas major depressive disorder, MDD, is a persistent medical condition. It significantly impairs your ability to function day to day and involves that loss of interest or pleasure in things what's called anhedonia.
And the article stresses, just because someone feels sad, even intensely sad, doesn't automatically mean they have depression.
Exactly. It brings in the criteria from the DSM-5-PR, that's the manual professionals use, and it highlights that depression is way more than just feeling sad for a bit.
It looks at duration, right? How long symptoms last.
Duration is key. At least 2 weeks, nearly every day, most of the day. And the number of symptoms matters too. You need at least 5 out of 9 specific symptoms, and one of those has to be either depressed mood or that anhedonia, the loss of interest.
Can you list some of those 9 symptoms?
Sure. Significant weight or appetite changes, sleep disturbances, feeling physically agitated or really slow down, persistent fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt, difficulty concentrating or making decisions, and importantly, recurring thoughts about death or suicide.
And the impact on just living life, that's a big difference too.
A huge difference. That's a key differentiator. MDD causes significant distress or impairment in daily life, work, school, relationships, self-care. Typical sadness usually isn't to real things to that extent.
And feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness are more tied to depression.
Generally, yes. More characteristic of depression.
Yeah.
And those thoughts about death or suicide are obviously a very serious sign needing immediate help.
Which is why the article rightly warns against self-diagnosing, right? It's complex.
Absolutely. Professional assessment is crucial. And the article also briefly mentions other types, like persistent depressive disorder that's more chronic, maybe less severe, seasonal affective disorder, perinatal depression.
Just showing that depression isn't one single thing.
Exactly. And the comparison table in the article is really useful, laying out the differences between sadness and MDD on things like duration, intensity, symptoms, impact, self-esteem, need for help, etc.
Okay, now the article also tackles grief and something called prolonged grief disorder, or PGD.
Right. Grief, as we know, is a natural response to loss, especially losing someone you love.
And it shares some things with sadness, maybe withdrawal like depression, but it's distinct.
It is. In typical grief, the pain often comes in waves, and it's usually mixed with positive memories of the person. Your sense of self-worth generally stays intact, and the intensity tends to lessen over time.
How does it differ from MDD specifically?
Well, self-esteem is usually preserved in grief, whereas depression often brings that sense of worthlessness. Also, thoughts in grief might be about wanting to join the deceased, while in MDD, suicidal thoughts are more often about ending one's own suffering due to despair.
And the diagnostic rules have changed a bit around bereavement.
They have. The bereavement exclusion was removed. This means MDD can be diagnosed during grief if the full criteria are met. But clinicians need to be really careful to distinguish normal grief from a depressive disorder.
Because loss can trigger depression in vulnerable people.
It certainly can. And if they happen together, the grief can be more severe and last longer.
Which brings us to prolonged grief disorder, PGD. That sounds tough.
It's a very difficult condition where that acute, intense grief just doesn't ease up over time. The article mentions it's defined as lasting at least a year for adults, maybe 6 months for kids and adolescents. It becomes a clinically significant issue needing specific help.
What are the main symptoms?
The core symptoms are an intense yearning or longing for the person who died, and a persistent preoccupation with them, or maybe with the circumstances of the death for kids. At least one of these needs to be present most days.
And there are other symptoms, too, for a diagnosis.
Yes, you need at least 3 additional symptoms, most days for the last month. Things like feeling like a part of you died, strong disbelief about the death, avoiding reminders, intense emotional pain, anger, bitterness, sorrow, difficulty reintegrating into life, feeling emotionally numb, feeling life is meaningless, or intense loneliness.
And it has to be more severe than what's culturally expected.
Exactly. It represents a kind of failure to transition towards what's called integrated grief, where the loss becomes part of your ongoing life rather than dominating it.
Are there risk factors, things that make PGD more likely?
The article lists a few. Being older, having a history of depression or bipolar, being a caregiver, if the death was sudden or traumatic, especially the death of a child's social isolation, or a history of childhood trauma.
So it's not random. Vulnerabilities and circumstances matter.
Right? Which suggests maybe targets for early support.
Okay.
And importantly, there's a higher risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviors with PGD.
So recognizing it as a distinct condition helps with treatment.
Definitely. It allows for better identification and using more targeted, specialized treatments, sometimes called complicated grief treatment.
Okay, so we've really dug into what sadness is, what triggers it, how it's different from depression and PGD. Now, let's pivot to that really fascinating question. Why? Why do we even have sadness? What's its purpose?
This is where it gets really interesting looking at it through an evolutionary lens. Emotions, generally, are seen as adaptive responses that helped our ancestors survive and, thrive.
Okay.
So sadness, from this perspective, likely evolved as a response to losing people, resources, social status, important attachments.
And its main purpose is?
Well, it's thought to be primarily to motivate us, either to recover what we've lost or maybe change our behavior to prevent similar losses happening again in the future.
And attachment social bonds seem central to this.
Hugely central. Those connections are vital for survival. So when a bond is lost, that feeling of sadness kind of pushes us to try and restore it or repair it.
It's like the emotional pain highlights how valuable those relationships are.
Exactly. Some researchers specifically link sadness to separation, anxiety, loss, grief, reinforcing that role in social attachments.
But it also acts like an alert system, different from anger.
Right. Anger often propels us into action, doesn't it? Sadness, though, often signals a problem that needs us to pause, reflect, maybe change our strategy. That pause itself can be really adaptive.
Taking a step back instead of rushing in.
Precisely.
Right.
And there's this idea that maybe milder sadness or withdrawal could have helped conserve energy back when resources were scarce. Or in social hierarchies, maybe appearing less assertive if you were lower status, actually reduced aggression from others. Though the article does question how adaptive severe prolonged depression might be from this view.
And there's even a potential link to the immune system. That sounds new.
It's an emerging theory. Some research suggests a possible link between genetic risk for depression and maybe an enhanced immune response. The idea is that sadness might coordinate energy conservation with heightened immune activity.
Like getting ready to heal or fight infection while laying low.
Something like that. Even sickness behavior, withdrawing when you're ill, might have evolved partly to protect the group from catching whatever you have.
So sadness isn't just internal, it's also a signal we send out.
A really important signal. Our expressions, tears, face, posture, voice, communicate distress to others. They signal that we might need support.
And showing that vulnerability can trigger empathy.
Exactly. It can elicit empathy, leading others to offer care, which in turn strengthens those social bonds. Oxytocin might even play a role here.
So suppressing sadness could backfire socially.
It could. The article suggests if we try too hard to hide it, we might undermine this adaptive function and end up feeling more isolated.
And surprisingly, negative moods like sadness might actually improve some communication aspects.
Yeah, this was interesting. Things like potentially increasing clarity, helping us understand ambiguity better, maybe even making us more persuasive, fair, or polite in interactions.
Oh.
It's like slowing down lets us think more carefully about what we say and do socially, more considered exchange.
And in terms of social dynamics, like hierarchies?
Evolutionary theory suggests depressive states might help navigate those, maybe signaling a need for allies or prompting retreat from conflicts or goals that are just out of reach. Crying, especially, is a potent signal for help.
That power of pause you mentioned seems really key here. Sadness makes us withdraw and reflect.
Crucial point. It gives us that space for cognitive processing, reevaluation after a loss or big change.
And this reflection can actually boost our thinking.
The article highlights this. We might rely less on mental shortcuts, pay more focused attention, think more analytically, get a more realistic view of things.
There's research on this.
Yeah. Research suggesting sad moods might improve eyewitness memory or make people less gullible. It's like it shifts our brain into a more careful, detail-oriented mode.
And that helps with analyzing problems, rethinking goals after setbacks.
Definitely. Plus, sadness can play a role in helping us accept difficult realities, things we can't change.
Yeah.
Think about that adaptive despair phase. In some loss models, it promotes mourning and eventually detaching from what's lost.
Acceptance being key for resilience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It allows for adaptation and redirecting our energy.
Now, sadness often feels passive, but the article argues it has a motivational side, too.
It does. Counterintuitive maybe, but it can be a catalyst for change and growth.
Back to that evolutionary idea, motivating recovery or behavioral change.
Exactly. That negative feeling compels us to try and improve our situation, avoid future loss. It can prompt goal reevaluation, especially if current goals are proving disappointing or unreachable.
A push to redirect our efforts.
Right. And there's even research linking sadness to motivation for healthy changes, like quitting smoking or exercising. Maybe because we feel more perceived control after processing a loss.
Interesting. So the dissatisfaction itself can fuel a desire for something better.
Precisely. By prompting us to pause, process, adapt, sadness ultimately contributes to emotional regulation and resilience. It helps us grow and cope better down the line.
Okay, understanding the purpose is one thing, but how do we actually navigate these feelings? What are some practical, healthy ways to deal with sadness?
That's the crucial next step, right? Moving into actionable strategies. And the very first step the article emphasizes is simple, but maybe not easy. Acknowledging and validating your own sadness.
Just letting yourself feel it. instead of pushing it away.
Exactly. Give yourself permission to feel sad. The article even notes crying can be a natural stress reliever, and naming the emotion can help too.
How does naming it help?
Saying I am feeling sad rather than I am sad creates a bit of psychological distance. It makes it feel less like your entire identity and more like a temporary state you're experiencing. Gives you a bit more control.
And being mindful, just noticing the feelings without judgment.
That's key. Observing the emotions, the physical sensations, without beating yourself up for having them. And self-compassion is huge here.
Treating yourself like you'd treat a friend who is sad.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Letting go of that self-judgment that just gets in the way of processing. And finally, acceptance, recognizing sadness is normal, inevitable sometimes. Practicing willingness to feel it rather than fighting it can actually reduce the suffering around it.
Okay, so once we acknowledge it, what are some productive ways to actually process it? Healthy outlets.
The article offers a good range, stressing that it's personal. What works for one might not work for another, and it might depend on the sadness itself.
Like journaling.
Journaling is great for introspection, finding patterns, maybe countering negative thoughts. You can just let it all out, no filter, or even try a gratitude journal.
What about creative stuff?
Creative expression, drawing, music, writing, dance, crafting, can be a powerful, nonverbal release. Provides relief.
And physical activity always seems to come up.
Because it works.
Hmm.
Endorphins, mood boost, stress reduction, even a short walk can make a difference.
Spending time in nature, too.
Definitely. Very calming, mood-lifting for many.
Right.
Brings perspective.
Mm.
And mindfulness, relaxation techniques.
Deep breathing, meditation.
Yeah, deep breathing, loving kindness, meditation, guided visualization, progressive muscle relaxation, they all help calm the nervous system, reduce distress, find some inner peace.
What about just doing things you enjoy, even if you don't feel like it?
That's behavioral activation. The idea is that action can sometimes precede motivation. It helps break that cycle of inactivity that often comes with sadness. Even just listening to music can provide comfort, solace, connection, help process things.
So it's about finding what works for you.
It's a personal journey, absolutely.
Now, talking about it, communicating sadness seems really important.
It is. Sharing allows for understanding, comfort, getting support. But it requires some skill.
Like what?
Well, self-awareness, knowing your feelings and needs, and social awareness, choosing the right person, time, and method.
Any specific strategies?
Using I statements is key. I feel sad when, rather than you made me sad. It avoids blame, fosters empathy.
Being clear and specific?
Helps others understand. Describe your feelings, maybe the reasons if you're comfortable. Choosing who you talk to matters too. Someone trusted, empathetic, receptive.
And telling them what you need.
Crucial. Do you just need them to listen? Or do you want quiet time, company, a hug? Stating your needs helps them help you.
And if we're the listener?
Active listening is vital. Be present, don't interrupt, reflect back what you hear, validate their feelings.
Nonverbal communication matters too, right? Our own and theirs.
Hugely. Facial expressions, posture, tone of voice often speak volumes. And sometimes writing it down, text, email, letter, can feel easier, allows you to formulate thoughts carefully.
All these help build connection and support, avoid misunderstandings.
Exactly. And that leads right into the role of social connection itself.
As a buffer against sadness.
A huge buffer. An antidote to isolation, really crucial for well-being. Seeking social support, friends, family, groups, a therapist is consistently recommended. It's therapeutic.
What are the main benefits?
Emotional support, understanding, countering loneliness, which has that two-way link with depression, getting different perspectives or advice. Just having someone listen. It strengthens relationships, that sense of belonging.
It taps into that adaptive function again, right?
Yeah.
Signaling need for care.
Precisely. You're leveraging that evolutionary mechanism. And the article makes a good point. Quality often matters more than quantity. Nurturing deeper, reliable relationships provides the most effective support.
Okay, so we've covered healthy ways. But what happens when expression goes wrong? What about suppressing sadness or using unhealthy coping mechanisms?
Yeah, this is where we see the hidden costs,
Yes.
the potential long-term damage. Let's start with suppression.
Just trying to inhibit the feeling or showing it.
Right. It's an active effort, takes energy, and it has some serious mental and physical health consequences.
Mentally, what does the article say?
Increased risk of anxiety, depression, stress-related illnesses. It can even mediate suicidality, separate from depression itself. There's that rebound effect. Two suppressed feelings come back stronger.
Wow. And it impairs coping, makes it harder to think straight.
Exactly. Energy gets diverted, It can lead to relationship difficulties, lower self-esteem, less life satisfaction, even increased aggression sometimes.
And physically, suppression takes a toll there too.
Definitely. Heightened physiological arousal, sympathetic nervous system on overdrive. It's linked to cardiovascular issues, heart disease risk, weakened immune system, even increased mortality risk, including potential links to cancer.
Goodness. Plus other physical symptoms like muscle tension, aches, sleep issues.
All possible. Suppression is basically avoidance. It stops you from engaging with, understanding, and integrating the emotion, which hinders healing.
And then there are the unhealthy coping mechanisms people turn to for short-term relief.
Exactly. Things that offer a temporary escape, but worsen problems long term. They usually involve avoidance, numbing, or distraction, not actual processing.
And they block those adaptive functions of sadness we talked about.
They do. The article lists common ones. Substance abuse, alcohol, drugs provides temporary escape. It leads to addiction, worse health.
Emotional eating, binge eating.
Yeah, for comfort or distraction. But it creates a cycle of negative emotions plus health issues. Avoidance and denial, just ignoring feelings or situations, hinders processing, problem solving, leads to stagnation, anxiety.
Excessive social isolation.
Can deepen loneliness, make sadness or depression worse. Overworking another avoidance tactic doesn't resolve issues, leads to burnout.
Negative self-talk, rumination.
Lowers self-esteem, intensifies sadness, hopelessness. Rumination just keeps spinning those negative thoughts. Self-harm offers maybe fleeting relief, but causes more turmoil, injury, distress.
Impulsive or risky behaviors, too.
As a distraction, yeah, but they have negative consequences, increased stress. The bottom line is, these fail to address the root causes. They offer temporary escape, but often create cycles, deteriorating emotional health. Learning healthy strategies is crucial.
So if sadness feels overwhelming, what are some healthier ways to manage those intense feelings? Emotional regulation techniques.
Exactly. Emotional regulation isn't about eliminating emotions, but influencing when and how we experience and express them adaptively. Reducing vulnerability, increasing positive experiences.
How do I do that?
Several strategies. Cognitive reappraisal, changing how you interpret a situation to change its emotional impact, like reframing a setback as learning.
Acceptance again, allowing emotions without judgment.
Yes, core to therapies like ACT and DBT. Mindfulness, present moment awareness without judgment, helps disengage from the intensity, interrupts rumination.
Distraction can be okay sometimes.
As a temporary shift for intense emotions, yes. Problem solving, addressing the root cause if possible. Seeking social support, comfort, perspective, assistance.
And those behavioral strategies from DBT.
Right. Opposite action, acting opposite to unhelpful emotion urges. Building positive experiences, proactively doing pleasant or mastery activities, reducing emotional vulnerability basics like sleep, diet, exercise.
Positive self-talk, too.
Replacing negative thoughts with balanced, encouraging ones. The article reiterates that expressive suppression is generally maladaptive, and therapies like ACT and DBT specifically teach these regulation skills.
Okay, so moving beyond just managing sadness in the moment, what about cultivating overall emotional well-being, building a stronger foundation?
Self-care is fundamental here. The article defines it as intentional actions for physical and mental health, enhances stress management, reduces illness risk, boosts well-being.
Even small acts make a difference.
Substantial impact. It also addresses those physiological things that can worsen sadness or depression. And importantly, even with low motivation, starting small helps.
What are some key practices?
Regular exercise, healthy diet, hydration, prioritizing sleep, mindfulness or relaxation, maintaining social connections, engaging in hobbies, practicing gratitude, focusing on positives, challenging negative thoughts, setting boundaries, spending time in nature, practicing self-compassion. Familiar themes, but crucial.
And building resilience, that capacity to cope.
Right. Resilience is adapting well to adversity, stress, not avoiding hardship, but navigating it effectively. It involves bouncing back, sometimes even personal growth.
It's learned, not fixed.
It's a dynamic process, learned behaviors, thoughts, actions. Managing acute sadness effectively actually builds this long-term fortitude.
What helps build it?
Many things we've discussed: healthy physical habits, mindfulness, emotional regulation, cognitive restructuring, reframing sadness as learning strong social support, finding purpose, problem-solving skills, acceptance, self-compassion. Successfully navigating sadness builds resilience.
Another really crucial point, recognizing the line. When does sadness signal something more serious, needing professional support?
Super important. The article stresses recognizing when sadness might be MDD or PGD. That 2-week rule is a guideline, but it's duration plus impairment and other symptoms that matter.
What are the key signs to look for?
Okay, duration. Sadness or loss of interest, lasting more than 2 weeks, most of the day, nearly every day, interfering with life. Severity, feeling overwhelmed, unmanageable, disproportionate. Impairment, difficulty with work, school, relationships, self-care.
Presence of other depression symptoms?
Yes, multiple symptoms like hopelessness, worthlessness, anhedonia, sleep appetite changes, fatigue, concentration issues, physical agitation or slowing.
And suicidal thoughts or self-harm?
Immediate help needed. Call 988 or your local crisis line. Also relying heavily on unhealthy coping or symptoms worsening despite self-help efforts.
And symptoms of PGD if there's been a loss?
Right, that persistent, intense grief and impairment beyond a year, or 6 months for kids adolescents.
What's the first step if you recognize these signs?
Contacting your primary care doctor or a mental health professional. Your doctor can rule out medical conditions first.
And the key message is that help is available.
Absolutely. Effective treatments, therapy, medication exist and improve quality of life. Seeking help is a sign of strength and self-awareness, not weakness.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've seen that sadness is, well, normal, essential even.
Totally. Serving important evolutionary and psychological purposes, communication, reflection, motivation.
And healthy expression is key, acknowledging it, processing it productively, communicating effectively, leaning on social connections.
While suppression and unhealthy coping really backfire, harming mental and physical health.
But emotional regulation skills, self-care, building resilience, these can help us manage overwhelming sadness and build that foundation for well-being.
And ultimately, understanding sadness better can genuinely lead to improved emotional health and make us more resilient when facing life's challenges.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. How might understanding your own experiences of sadness differently now, in light of all this, change how you approach your emotions moving forward?
Yeah, maybe think about the adaptive potential hidden within your own sadness. Can you approach it with a bit more curiosity, maybe even acceptance, knowing its deeper purpose, something to reflect on?